So welcome to this comparison between the Sony A7 III and the Sony FX30. These are two fantastic cameras. I think that they're in line for competition. And the FX30 is more in line for competition with the A7 III than the A7 IV because of pricing. Because you can get this thing for a pretty good price, more closely aligned to what you would spend on the FX30. That being said, let's get into comparing these things and kind of figure out who's the winner of these two cameras. But before we get into that, I have to say thank you to B&H Photo for sending me the FX30 for testing and review. My affiliate relationship with B&H Photo has been a long time, and I really appreciate their support, and it helps me create content like this for you. If you're interested in pricing and availability, please hit the link in the description for this FX30 as well as the Sony A7 III. I buy all of my photo, lenses, camera gear, memory cards, all types of stuff from B&H Photo because it's a trusted source and you're always going to get what you pay for at the most competitive price. Well, let's get into this video. The Sony FX30 features a new Bison XR powered APS-C 6K sensor. With that, it is downsampled 4K 60p with no crop, and then it delivers full pixel readout. It is also capable 4K at 120 frames per second with a 1.6 times crop. It also has 240 frames per second slow motion at 1080p. I will say it is not that great a detail, but it is absolutely usable. The sensor has 14 stops of dynamic range, dual base ISO 800 and 2500. The range is from 100 to 32,000, but you can also extend it from 50 all the way up to 102,000. It has 5-axis sensor shift image stabilization, has a 2.3 million dot flip screen, no EVF, 10-bit 422 XAVC HS and all-I formats. It has 5 quarter 20 threads around the body. It has a dedicated zoom rocker. It has an active cooling fan that vents out the side. It delivers unlimited recording capability, has time code support. It has multiple visible tally lights so you know when you've hit the record button. It has a full-size HDMI port, and it is $1,800 without the top XLR handle. The Sony A7 III was originally released in April of 2018, has a Bison X powered full-frame 6K sensor. That sensor is capable of downsampling 4K 30p with no crop and delivers full pixel readout. It was one of the first cameras to offer a usable full frame and APS-C mode selection tool that delivered 4K in both of those, opening the door for more affordable options in lens selection. It has 120p slow motion at 1080p, which is absolutely usable. Delivers 15 stops of dynamic range. This was one of Sony's low light beasts, delivering a fantastic ISO range. In photo mode, it went from 100 to 51,000, and you could extend it from 50 to 204,000. Those ISO ranges were available in video mode as well. It has a 5-axis steady shot image stabilization. It has a 921,000 dot tilt screen, so not the best at all, but it made up for it with the 2.359 million dot EVF. For its time, and even now, it has a decent 8-bit 420 XAVC-S codec. It was one of the first hybrid bodies that supported the FZ100 battery that you could shoot for days on. It delivers passive cooling, in which I've never had any overheating issues with, probably because it had a 30-minute record limit. It has the infamous micro HDMI port. When it was released, and you can still buy it new for $2,000, which I would shy away from because you can get it open box and used for around $1,600. Some housekeeping items as we move through this video. I'll leave annotations in the screen so you know which camera is filming what. I have 3 cameras in this setup. I've used my Sony A7III for some of it, but in the comparisons, I've shot them both on the Sony A7 III and the Sony FX30. So just keep that in mind as we go through the video. So here's a sample of the Sony FX30 using the Sigma 24-70 f2.8 lens, and this is the E-mount version. This lens supports full frame field of view, so I thought it would be an interesting comparison to take this lens and throw it on the A7 III to show you the field of view and how it's affected when you go down to APS-C type sensors. And this is at 24 millimeters on the FX30. Another thing to consider with this sample footage is that I'm recording it through my Sennheiser MKH416 into the Sony XLR K3M. It's the adapter that goes onto the hot shoe that allows you to provide phantom power to microphones of this type. And since we're filming all this on the Sony FX30, there's one thing that I'd like for you to consider if you are thinking about bringing the FX30 into your workspace or implementing it into your workflow in some way, shape, or form. It's lens selection. There are a ton of great APS-C size sensor lenses out there. One, for example, is a Sigma 18-35, which is essentially the YouTuber's lens of a generation. That is a phenomenal lens that I still have and I still use. There's a bunch of different options out there that are more affordable to you because now you don't have to like consider if it's a full frame lens or not. You can use full frame lenses like I am here, and it's just a bunch of different options that are available to you. So that's just one consideration or one thing that you should think about. So what are your thoughts on this sample and this controlled environment of the Sony FX30? Feel free to leave me a comment down below. So here we are with the Sony A7 III. It's in the same placement, same camera settings, same everything. The only difference? Full frame mode. You can see the field of view is extremely exacerbated. It's a much wider field of view because of full frame. And this is at 24 millimeters on the Sigma, 24-70 as well. The good thing about the Sony A7 III is that it has Super 35 mode or crop mode. So I'm gonna bump that in right now. So with the push of a button, here I am in APS-C mode on the Sony A7 III. And that's something to at least admire or at least appreciate for its versatility, because you can use all the same lenses that you would consider on using with the Sony FX30. You can use them here as well. You just are limited to crop mode. But that isn't a bad thing because everything is being downsampled anyways, and that's a benefit of both systems, so they both offer that. One thing I will speak to is the limited throughput of which you would get from passing out video via HDMI, because that's how all of this is being recorded. I can see quite a bit of banding on my Ninja Adamus that I didn't see with this FX30, because I mean the Sony FX30 has a much improved and a much newer sensor. So if you're looking right here, you can see a little bit of banding. It's not as smooth as transition as you would think, as well as the blue here. Hopefully you can see with my finger where I'm following this. You see how it like starkly drops off? It's just a banding issue that the sensor is just not capable of. Is it bad? I wouldn't think so, and I don't think so because I've been shooting my videos on this camera with this setup like this for a very long time, and I haven't heard a lot about it. Anyways, audio is being recorded on the same microphone at the same levels, using the same setup, so you can compare the two and kind of evaluate them both for yourself. Again, this is the Sony A7 III. What do you think? Leave me a comment down below. Before I get into this comparison between the two cameras and their low light performance, I want to preface it by saying pay close attention to the sweater region on the footage as well as the gray background. You will notice the grain that's being introduced on both of the systems, but how you look at it and how you evaluate it is important to me. You still will notice a difference between the two, even with YouTube's compression, and that's something I wanted to make you aware of as we head into this next comparison. So I thought it would be an interesting test and comparison between the two of somewhat of a low light test. I have the Sony FX30 at ISO 3200, and I'm using the Sigma 18-35, and I've opened that all the way up to f1.8. So that lens helps in and of itself, but I thought it would be an interesting concept to test this in this type of controlled environment. You won't find an extreme low light test with this camera. This is just something I thought it would be interesting to test. I turned all of my studio lights off and I turned my key light to 1%. The NAND light is pretty powerful, so the 1% offers quite a bit of light, but you will be able to notice a little bit of grain with this sample. From my perspective, this footage is usable. Is it my first choice? No, but if I were running out of time or I was on a crunch and I needed to record some footage in a decently lit or a low lit type of situation, I think the FX30 would do a great job. There's only a little bit of grain in comparison to what the Sony A7 III provides. I would say that the Sony A7 III does a better job, and it all depends on what type of glass you're throwing in front of this awesome sensor anyway. So with that being said, what do you think about this low lights, low light, it's limited light setting or test? Before we move or transition to the Sony A7 III again, I just want to say that I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate having a full-size HDMI on the Sony FX30. I hate the micro HDMI on the Sony A7 III, and that change in and of itself is probably worth it from my perspective because it aligns closer with my Sony A7S III. I absolutely love having the full-size HDMI. I can't stand that little connector, and it's just super annoying. I lose connection, the freaking thing falls out all the time. It's just a big pain in my butt. Anyways, let's go ahead and hop over to the Sony A7 III right now. So here we are with the Sony A7 III with the low light test. Again, this is the same setup from the Sony FX30, same ISO at ISO 3200. This is much more controlled than what you would experience on, say, an extreme, low light test. You won't find that here. I just wanted to see how these cameras would perform in this type of controlled comparison. I will say that there's a little bit less grain that's introduced into the footage with the Sony A7 III, and you can tell by just looking at the different cameras. From the Sony FX30, there's a little bit more grain there. And that's an advantage of the Sony A7 III. It has a better low light performance pretty much across the board, and I think it just does a better job. But again, this is up for your subjective evaluation as well. One thing that I do want to kind of highlight is that I've done all this testing in a subjective manner because I wanted to see how the Sony FX30 would fit in my workspace and in my workflow. I'm literally just sharing what I think from my test, what I would value in the comparisons between the two. What do you think about these two cameras, especially in this, difference of comparisons between the two? I feel like I'm looking at this footage and they're pretty dang close, and it's really hard to consider or even, evaluate the two from my perspective. So that does it from the comparison stance on both of these cameras. What does that mean for you? Well, my recommendation is completely dependent on what your actual needs are. Both of these cameras fit specific needs, and it all depends on what it is you're going for. If you're going for talking head, A-roll type of stuff, interviews, things like that, I think the Sony A7 III is going to perform better for you, and it will deliver better results. If you're a run and gun shooter that require multiple frame rates and resolutions and capability to output RAW and be able to do more creative things, and you are in a space where you're limited on budget, the FX30 is your camera. It is definitely going to suit you better, and it has nothing to do with the sensor size at that point. It's just a better camera for that type of shooting situation. And that's just my honest opinion. If you can get the Sony A7 III for around $1,500, that is absolutely the choice that I would make between these two cameras. I would never pay, full price for the Sony A7 III because it's been out for a few years now. B&H has a ton of deals on the Sony A7 III right now. Feel free to check the link in the description. But with that being said, the FX30 is such a fantastic camera. It's really hard to make the decision not to go with it. It just is the creator's dream that is on a budget. It is the YouTuber's dream that is on a budget. It just helps with a ton of different shooting situations. If you're looking for your first camera, the FX30 is probably going to be my recommendation to you, especially my fellow YouTube content creators out there. So ultimately, you have to look at these cameras subjectively and make a decision based on your needs. And that, I can't really make a recommendation towards because I don't know your specific needs. And with that, we'll just close this video out. But before I close, I have to disclose B&H was kind enough to lend me the Sony FX30 for this video. If you're interested in pricing and availability, like I said before, please feel free to hit the links in the description. Shopping through those are my affiliate links. It costs you nothing in addition to make your purchase. It just helps content creation here on this channel. And it helps B&H recognize that I am, a decent content creator that makes good content. I did borrow this from them, and I did purchase the Sony A7 III from them many years ago. So all of this kit right here is all of it's come from B&H. I mean, they are my go-to when it comes to photo video needs. Well, that about does it for me in this one. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to give me a thumbs up. If you didn't, you know what to do. Thank you for taking the time to watch. I'm Tomas, and I will catch you in the next one.